I I set up strength and conditioning groups with groups that actually didn't really like each other. So, and I forced them to talk, forced them together to actually make them talk, and I put them in smaller groups. And then from that smaller group, I put that into a bigger group, and then I put that into a bigger group. And it was about just them communicating. They didn't have to like each other, but they had to respect each other and actually communicate.
Yeah.
So I was trying to build it not necessarily just on skills, but also on their collaboration and their communication. And for me, communication was probably the biggest thing that was broken.
If you've ever wanted to learn how to rebuild trust in a team that stopped talking, lead when you're still finding your footing, or recover from burnout without losing your edge, then this episode of Teams That Swear is for you. Our guest in this episode is Lee McDermott, Commonwealth Games gold medalist, Olympic gymnast, and now head coach at Cirque du Soleil. He's faced broken teams, identity loss, and most moments that leaders try to hide. And he found a different way back, built on relationships, rest, and rhythm. And make sure to stick around after the conversation, where I'll share 3 practical things you can take back to your team today. Here's my conversation with Lee McDermott. So Lee, your husband, your father, Commonwealth Games gold medalist ×2, an Olympian, and a Cirque du Soleil head coach. Now, there may be part of your story that stops people in the tracks, but there's a story about you that doesn't include any of that. So I want to kick off with that. You've met Michael Jackson's family. How the heck did that come about, and what was that like?
Well, after I was working in Japan for 4 years, I was there for during the earthquake and tsunami, and the show at the time closed, and I was asked to go and do the creation of the Michael Jackson 1 show in Las Vegas. And one of the things I had to do was look after Michael's mum on the opening night of the show. So, yes, working with Michael's choreographers and dancers and things like that. But yeah, looking after Catherine was special.
So what did you learn about Catherine? What did that look like in terms of you having to actually take care of her?
The one thing that really stood out to me definitely was when she said, "I'm so proud of my son." And of course, she doesn't talk about Michael Jackson. She just says, "It's my son," and just for that to be a proud mum, and like many mums in the world, being proud of their sons.
Yeah, right on. Well, I don't know how many people can say that, but I thought that was a pretty interesting point. And I definitely don't know how many people can say that they had to take care of Michael Jackson's mom. Now, Lee, you're also the author of Resilience on Rings, where you share your story. Now,
Yes.
if you're okay with it, I thought today we'd follow a similar approach, going through a few chapters of your life.
Sure, that's right.
So let's call chapter 1 childhood and formation, how you become who you are today. Now, if someone had never met you, but
Yes.
wanted to understand how you become who you are, where would you start?
I guess as a young boy, growing up in Peckham wasn't the best of places in the world to be brought up. And, you know, I had good parents, but it was a pretty uh, rough, I wouldn't say rough childhood, but rough area to live in. So that I guess that kind of framed me, and, have to make sure that you kinda have to grind to make sure that you don't get left behind. And, you know, uh, school, I went to a very, very good school, but, obviously, just like many schools, there's bullying and there's a lot of other things that go on, so you just have to try and make your way through that. But I was lucky enough to my parents, my dad was actually into football a lot, like most English kids. I started doing football, and then one day, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to do gymnastics. And to be honest, I'd said no at the beginning, I guess, because it wasn't a thing to do in 80s when I was growing up in London. So, but I went, and I just loved kind of just chucking myself around, and I guess kind of landed on my head in the foam pit. Kind of excited me.
What you mentioned growing up in Peckham, you had to grind it out.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It wasn't always the easiest of places to grow up. Walking down the road and you'd see gangs, and you have to make sure that you had a good peripheral vision, make sure you cross over the road. Um, going to gym one day, having a knife stuck in my side, asking me for my Walkman. That's when we had cassette tapes. But so that shows you how old I am. But you just had to have your wits about you, definitely.
So how do you think that's influenced you now? Like, when you look back at that and kind of look at how you become who you are, how has living in an area like that impacted?
I like I said, I definitely had my wits about me, but I think the most part, even when I was 13, I did my first international. So I was still living in London, still living in Peckham, and I guess when I started having a bit more of a global vision and going to all these other countries, I could see, and there's nothing wrong with Peckham as such. It's gentrified and everything now, but I knew that there was a much bigger world out there that I wanted to see, and sport gave me the opportunity to travel and see different places, and I got to see a lot of beautiful places, and I got to see some places that were not so good, and it gave me a good balance.
Yeah. Now you mentioned your parents. If we asked one of them to describe you as 6-year-old Lee, what words would they use?
I was pretty quiet when I was young. I'd stay in my bedroom playing Legos when I wasn't doing any kind of sport or whatever. But when I actually started doing sport, I was very. The only word I can describe is determined. And in my very, very early teens, I remember asking my mum, said, "If I ever wanna quit, don't let me." And that day did come when I asked her, and she said no, and I was gutted that I had actually said that to her originally, but it kept me on track.
So when did that happen? Like, when did you go to mom and you're ready to quit, and she's like, "Nope, I'm sticking to what you told me earlier."
I think I was about 14 or something like that, and, I think I must have told her when I was, like, 11 or something like that, so, yeah, I was kind of annoyed with myself at the time that I'd actually said it, to be honest.
Yeah. And what influence do you think your parents had on you back then? But, like, it's easy to look back now. Uh,
Yeah.
Reflecting upon that, what would you say?
I guess they're committed because they had to drive me everywhere. It's, my gym when I moved to Sutton in Surrey, I was over an hour away, so they drove me to gym every day and drove me back. They organised, for me to have my school exams in Belgium, the World School Games. Um, they helped with a lot of that kind of stuff. So just having that support was very helpful.
And so obviously you spent a lot of time at the gym. What other things did you do as a kid that gave you joy? Is there a memory that stands out as a real shining moment that you can just think back and see it like it was yesterday?
I'll be really honest, being in the gym was my joy. That
That
that was my fun place. That was my place where I excelled, where I fitted in, where I where I could be me.
There you go.
To be honest, nothing else existed in my life. That was literally it.
That was it. Well, we obviously saw that play out, or that commitment, and that. Well, I would actually just say it's actually the joy of it as well. If you look at kids now when they're committing to sports, I find it's usually the ones that really enjoy it, that then they put in that work, are the ones that aspire, not aspire, but actually reach those higher levels. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's jump into chapter 2 then. The athlete life, the pursuit and the pressure. Uh, let's start out with. We're probably going to skip a lot, but let's talk about Commonwealth Games. What did it take to become a Commonwealth Games gold medalist?
I look back after writing my book because once I'd wrote my book, it was easier to reflect on that. And to be honest, it was determination and stubbornness, I think was probably, um, but I just loved it so much that nothing was going to get in the way. That they're literally, girlfriends or school or being with mates just didn't really exist. I that was my life, and that was I just knew I was good at it. So I didn't want to let that opportunity get by. So I managed to qualify for Commonwealth Games, and from there, just I had a very, very good competition. I had personal best in my first one, which I can't ask for much more.
Mhm.
And I just loved and I thrived off excelling and doing well.
Uh, on that day when you won gold,
Yes.
if I were a fly on that wall, morning you get up, you must have a routine, and I think it was in Vancouver. Is that right?
Yes. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I was a fly on that wall that morning, what would I have noticed about you?
On that morning, I'd just been sick for 4 days, and I'd had eye infection, ear infection, throat infection, and had temperature as well. And I was not able to train for about 3 or 4 days prior to, and I was sat in the gym, sorry, I was sat in bed, miserable for a few days. And I think that only the day before I was able to go and have a bit of a stretch. Um, then I got to the competition and I woke up in the morning and something switched in my brain that just said, "You, this is your job. This is what you have to do. This is it." And when I look back, it was about the consistency of training that I'd done over the years, not necessarily the last 3 days of work, that made that day. So it was about my consistency of training and what I put into training prior.
So you're sick leading into it. You go out, you do one of your best performances. It probably gives a little bit of insight in terms of how you manage pressure. Are there any other routines or, um, yeah, any tips or anything that you applied to help you show up, whether it was for that gold medal performance or other performances and competitions as you grew up?
What I tried to do was make sure that when I woke up for the morning of competition was the same way I woke up the day before and the day before and the weeks before, and tried to keep a consistent pattern of what I did. Normally, when I went to the gym, I would normally have my headphones on. At the time, I was listening to Nirvana, "Smells Like Teen Spirit," just to get me pumped up and ready to go. Um, but I always thrived on pressure. I always did better when I was under pressure, and when it was easy was kind of when I messed up. So I tried to keep a consistency.
Yeah. What about like when I'm working with leaders, there's times we'll talk about the performance curve that demonstrates the relationships between performance and pressure, and everybody there's a certain amount of pressure that they can take or that they work at their optimal performance. And if they don't have enough pressure, often what we find is leaders become bored. But if they've got too much, there's burnout.
Uh-huh.
What did you ever find where the pressure got? How did you manage when the pressure got to be too much?
Um, I well, when I was about 15, 16, I was actually not able to hold a competition together to save my life. I was really struggling. I was messing up everywhere, and I remember just I woke up one morning and said to myself, "I'm not doing this for my mum, my dad, my mates, or anybody else. I'm doing this for me." And I completely changed my perspective of what I was doing. And after that, really I made everything count for me and what I needed to do. And actually, the more pressure I had, the better I performed after that.
And that it's interesting because you talk about like making it about you. It's interesting because I would have thought as a gymnast on the rings and in the vault, is that right? Were those your
Yes.
specialties?
Uh, Rings and pommel horse.
Or it's okay. Yep. It shows you my understanding of gymnastics world. I'm getting educated as we go along. But when I think about that, I think elite athlete, elite sport, but I think of that as an individual level versus being part of a part of a team. Um, if how what did you believe about leadership when you were an athlete that's changed now? Because now you're leading a team.
Yeah. A couple of things, I guess, really. As a gymnast, it is an individual sport, and it was about at the time, when I reflect, it was me, myself, and I had to really just rely on my own ability to perform. But we also did have team competitions where you had my scores would count towards a team. And in Commonwealth Games in '98 was when we actually won the team gold as well. So I did have to think about the we factor rather than just me. But also, if I don't pull my weight, then the team doesn't do its job as well. So there's that part. In sport, it was, especially in individual sport, it was more, I guess, more self-centered.
Yeah.
But when I went back to Cirque du Soleil, it was definitely much more of a we and a more of a collaboration. And I learned that through my coaching time as well when I was the national coach as well.
So I think that's really important because what I find in working, particularly with senior leadership teams, is that not every leader defaults to team. There's some that are very good, just individual performers. And that doesn't mean they can't do teamwork well, but they just got to put some specific focus and work harder at that part than the individual game. What shifts did you find you had to make? Or were there any strategies that you took that you found yourself, whoa, hold on here, hold on. I can't be thinking like this now. I've got to think a little bit more broader.
Well, when I was a gymnast, I was still coaching from the age of 18. So I guess I was a rookie, very green coach
Yeah.
when I was 18. But when I finished, and then I went over to New Zealand and I started coaching, um, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about the people that I have in front of me, and if they're doing a good job, that also reflects on me as an individual. So when I walk into a room, I I look at more of the peripheral vision of when I walk into a room and look at the people and look at what I'm working with. So you have to read a room when as a coach, and some people that you may be always working with may not need your help that day. You may need to be see the quiet one in the corner, and most of the time it can be the quiet one that's struggling. So I think as a coach, you definitely more of a peripheral vision as I walk in the room and spending the time getting to know the people and getting to know your team is probably one of the most important parts for me.
Yeah. What have you found works well to do that?
Oh God. Good question. Um, I will spend time when I go in the morning, and talking to people. And I won't just go down, sit at my desk or go and hide in the corner or anything. I'll actually try and find out a little bit more about their weekend, and I don't mean that superficially, just saying, "How's your weekend?" But actually trying to spend some time and talking to people. And once I can actually do that, I get a better sense of what the day is gonna be like. But I also use the resources around me. I have a physiotherapy department, which obviously, sees people every day, and we talk about the team that we have.
And so what would we hear in that conversation? Is it just about where they are from an injury perspective, or if we were watching on a Netflix documentary, what would we experience?
Of course, I'd ask how their weekend was, but it wouldn't just stop there and be superficial. I might have noticed that they might be limping a little bit at on the day before, or looking a bit miserable, or getting to know their family. Yeah, and did they talk to mum and dad at the weekend? Did brothers and sisters? What adventures did they go on? And um, some people that I might have spoken to for 1 minute, 1 week might be 10, 15 minutes that day. And I think that actually brings people closer together to actually understand them. So for me, when I say read a room, it's knowing your team.
Yeah. We talk about knowing the team. We're gonna shift a little bit to knowing you, probably
Okay.
in a different way. And we're gonna call this the transition. And there
Yes.
might be a little bit of a crash and a recovery. And when I talk transitions, I see transitions, and we're talking big transitions, but it's they shift from one identity to another, and it's not just changing what you do,
Yes.
but and I think in sport it's even more pronounced, but it's redefining how you see yourself. 2000, you missed out at the Olympics after injury, and that may have been the time that the lights went out from an elite sport perspective. Can,
Yes,
can you
definitely.
take us to that moment when you realized you knew that from a career perspective as an athlete, gymnastics, this was over?
So I'd prepped just before 2000 that that I knew I was going to retire at the end of 1999 in Tianjin World Champs. Um, at that time, there wasn't a lot of support around post post career for athletes. I mean, they spoke about it, but not really much out there. So I hadn't really prepped that much, but I just kind of knew that I wanted to coach. Um, I don't think the reality kicked in straight away once I finished, because I kind of went straight into a coaching sphere that I was there for a while. And then as I started coaching, my wife turned around to me and said, "You know, you're damn miserable."
Mm.
And I said, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "I think you need to go to the doctor, and I think you might be depressed." And I'm like, "No, I'm good." You know, you put on that brave face, and you just carry on. And so I actually did go to the doctor, and the doctor said that I was depressed, and that a lot of that came from finishing my career as an athlete or whatever. And to be honest, I felt more depressed because they told me I was depressed, and I thought I was doing pretty well, to be honest, at the time. And yeah, I kind of spiraled and felt very depressed, and doctors put me on medication, and I really lost the sense of self and who I was and what I was at the time. But it did take a little while, to be honest. It wasn't just exactly at 2000. Um, I think it just kind of spiraled a little bit after that.
And so, where did that spiral take you? Like, so you did the coaching. Your wife said, "Hey, I think you need to talk to somebody." Our partners
Yeah.
seem to know us well, which works good sometimes, and other times it's like, "Oh my god." Um,
Yeah.
a great mirror. He went to the doctor, got a diagnosis, and then where did that go?
I was miserable. Coaching, I felt that I was kind of useless. I felt that I didn't have much purpose. But I obviously had to keep working, and making sure I bring enough money in for the family, and doing that kind of stuff. And I guess it was more just internal that I'd lost myself. And it was the I felt it was more the label I put upon myself, and that was Lee the gymnast, and I wasn't that anymore. Um, and then that sense was lost. So yes, I was Lee the husband, Lee the dad, Lee, all of those things, but Lee the gymnast didn't really exist anymore, and I didn't know really what I was.
Why do you think that label mattered the most?
Well, when I wrote about it in the book, it was like everybody putting a label on me, or was it me putting a label on me,
Mm.
of what I was? And I had to recalibrate and re-see myself as something else other than the athlete that I was. And I know a lot of athletes go through this, and um, Ben might have something to say with that when he has his questions a little bit later, which is a big struggle that not a lot of athletes actually speak about. But I did find a sense of purpose. I did enjoy coaching, but nothing matched the endorphin high of when I was winning, and when I was competing. I guess I also missed that that part, and that dopamine hype high of when you're competing. And to be honest, even to this day, I don't think I've reached something that matches that. But I try to find things that are similar.
Mm. And like that spiral, where did that ever get you to the point where you weren't sure if or how you'd come back from it? Because again, you go from a really high, you talk about, I don't know if I'll ever get that again, but if you're looking back,
Yeah.
like, did you experience where you're like, What do I do?"
I, yes, I was coaching the national team in gymnastics in New Zealand, and the team was doing really well, like probably the best that they'd ever done. And we'd got the highest ranking in Commonwealth Games, the highest at the Pacific Rim. The team was doing really well, but I did not feel that I was achieving something.
Mm.
Then in 2007, Cirque du Soleil came to Auckland, where I was living at the time, and I had friends that were on the show. We had barbecue and drinks, when you haven't seen your mates for a long time, and they'd asked me to join Cirque, and I originally said no. And then my wife said, "Well, why don't you consider it?" And kind of when I left the sport arena, I guess, and went into the entertainment, which still uses my skill set, I found a new sense of myself, and I could be me and do me, and I found a new, I guess, niche. Um, but I had to take the opportunity, and give it a try. And I've always said to me and my wife, I would rather die trying than have never tried.
So if so here's what I've heard as well. It's like I was going to ask you what helped you start climbing out of that, let's call it that bottom point of that
Yes.
spiral. So obviously your wife's played a big role um in that rise again. What else helped you climb out of that?
Well, they'd put me on medication originally, and I absolutely hated it. I was numb. I had no feeling. I had no emotion. I had nothing, and I took it upon myself to. I knew I had to make a change, and I didn't know what that change was. One was going to Cirque. Two was coming off the medication and trying to find something that I enjoyed. Um, I just knew that I couldn't continue in that path, and it's not easy to find what it is that can trigger it. I just knew that something had to change. Um, so I had to make some lifestyle changes. I had to make job changes. I had to make different um, ways in which I was acting, and doing, on a given day.
What
So yeah,
what do you
you
mean
know,
by this? Sorry, you caught you
body
cutting my
language.
attention. Yeah.
Um, it sounds stupid, but it's like I need to try and act in a better manner and a better way and like that, and slowly, you're I felt at the time that my body started to react, that I don't wanna say faking it, but, trying to put on a smile, trying to make things different on a daily basis. And slowly that did change.
So you've obviously done a lot of work and you've written your book. Looking back on that time, and that time I don't know how long that was, but when you look back on that, what what do you think you needed back then that you didn't know how to ask for?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Well, if you go through an experience and then after you can look back on it going, geez, I wish I would have done this, or I would have done this differently, or I wish I would have known to have taken this approach. Was there any insights you've gained from that when you look back on that time?
I think to be a little bit more, open and talk about it rather than just burying your feelings, way down below. And being brought up in Peckham, you have to be the kind of the tough man and just get on with it. And I think maybe if I'd spoken about it a little bit earlier, maybe I'd make some lifestyle changes a little bit earlier, or change my job a little bit earlier. Maybe those things may not have spiraled into that. I didn't really know much about post-career, thought processes for athletes. Um, Something that was out of our control is that, those resources were not really around when in the 90s, or as much as they are today.
Yeah. So, and I stay on the topic of transitions, and this is a little bit of a different transition than what you went through. But what I'm finding in a number of senior leaders right now, particularly male, so I'm thinking leaders between 45 to 55, who grew up in an environment where the male went to work, this is stereotype, but then I think this has changed, and it's probably a little bit different 20 or 30 years ago, but maybe it wasn't talked about as much. But a male would go to work long days, and just do that. And I've recently had 3 clients that I'm working with in around that 50 to 53 age bracket, very successful, but they've gone, I've never had a break. I need to take, I want to do something different, but I'm not sure what that is, but I know I need to take a break. So to me, that's an example of what I'm seeing happening more in terms of transitioning from a career perspective, but it's not just going from one job. They're being very deliberate. But looking back on your experience, is there any advice that you would have for leaders who are looking for something different, or perhaps they're forced to look for something different? Like you had to stop your career, you had an injury, but you also had a plan when you're going to stop. We're seeing more redundancies and restructures happening. Uh, what advice would you have for those folks to make the most of their transition time and do it well?
Um, well, as you mentioned earlier, I did go and work at a petrol station for a little while. I also went to be a car salesman for about 5 to 6 months.
How many
I,
cars did you sell?
well, funny story. I started working and I had no idea about cars. I literally didn't. And by month 5, 4, 5, I was the highest car salesman in the business at the time. So and I can see Ben nodding his head in the corner. And I did literally everything opposite to what they told me to do. I was supposed to sit in the car and be quiet and let them person enjoy the experience of being in a car. And there's me nattering away, talking about all different things, building a relationship with people, and then they get out the car and go, "I really like him. I'll buy a car," because I didn't talk about the heavy salesman kind of pitch. And I was just being authentically me. So going back to your question, I think it's okay to embrace change and do something completely different. If you're a little bit lost, try something different. Go for it. It doesn't mean you're gonna like it or not like it, but I think it's a recalibrate yourself maybe a little as well.
So it's funny you talk about that petrol station story, because one of the clients that I was talking about, he went and worked at a winery for a little bit, serving wine on the weekends. What did that time, I'll call it the time at the petrol station, but while you're
Yeah.
working there, what did that do for you?
It gave me a mental break. It also meant that I could just clock in, clock out, and not have to bring anything home. It was convenient, it was down the road. But it also reminded me that there's lots of other people out there with a story, because there were so many people that came in and just wanted to talk to you. And I would have conversations sometimes for 20, 30 minutes while I'm serving 30, 40, 50 people. And, an old lady's wanting to have a bit of a chat on the side about her and a dog and a car and something else. And it just made me realize that there's a lot of people out there with their own stories. Um, Sometimes it was annoying, don't get me wrong.
Mm.
But on the other hand, it was just to have a break, something completely different.
Yeah. That mental break, I think, is something that, yeah, I'm finding a lot of people are looking for. And if they're in a position to do that, then that could be.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've come back to Cirque du Soleil now, and I'm actually much more fresh, knowing that I've actually done that.
Okay, so let's jump into that. We'll call this chapter 4, right? This is leading creative teams under pressure, because I imagine there's a little bit of pressure, at least watching the performance from a execution and safety perspective. But so you're a head coach at Cirque du Soleil.
Yes.
What the heck does that mean? I've never heard of that until we met. A head coach at Cirque du Soleil.
I wear many hats. A lot of it is about the daily performance, making sure that the quality of performance and quality of standard of performance is met every day. I have to do the scheduling, I have to do strength and conditioning, I have to make sure the performance is are at a certain level. I also have to make sure that there's backup plans and backup scenarios for each individual act. So let's say there's 8 to 10 acts, I have to have a backup scenario for each one. But that's not always the same case, because it might not be the same personnel or injured or sick or like that. So I have to do that. My job, I have to bring together the artistic component and the direction from the artistic director.
Okay.
And I have to link that with the artists, and I also have to link that with the stage management team and the technical team. So if someone's flying around, we've got to talk about acceleration, velocity, decels on winches that they're flying around. I have to understand biomechanics around that component, making sure that that's safe, and then everything that I do has to be documented.
So how many, like when I think of a corporate structure, there's the CEO, there's the chief marketing officer, chief people officer, legal counsel, yada yada yada.
Yes.
What does your team look like? Like how many athletes are you oversee, or performers? They're probably both, to be honest. But how many teams do you work with?
So if I start kind of from the top, there's a coaching department in Montreal that I have to answer to. And then I have a boss that's on the show here, which is the artistic director. So they're my kind of two, one's a functional and one's an operational boss. From there, I then am the head coach working with the artistic director, and we look after about 53 artists
Okay.
on this given show. And so the artistic director kind of, I guess, looks after that main part with me. And then also I have to bridge into the technical side, which I'm not officially anyone's bosses on that side, but it can't function independently. They have to work together. And I basically have to bridge that gap. So it's 53 plus my bosses above and my technical team on the side to make that work.
That's a big team. Um, what's it like leading in that environment then?
It's enjoyable, stressful, casual, and all of the above. In one day can have so many different emotions, and I might go into work thinking everything's going to be all good one day, and then it cannot be the minute that I walk indoors. So I I guess I'm an adrenaline junkie, and I like having that the living in the stressful sphere.
So in this role, what is that, how does that stress come about? What does it look like?
But people can be sick, and they can't come into work, and I have to make sure that all the contingency plans have been trained. If they're not trained, I can't put them on stage. So every scenario that I can think of has to be trained and documented and gone through, and that can be stressful on a given day, making sure that every component is covered.
And when you talk about your athletes, you've got groups from different parts of the world.
Yes.
So you've got different cultural aspects that you need to consider. How do you manage that in terms of coaching? I imagine teams from Great Britain, Australia, Canada, where culturally they're similar. There's one approach, but if you're working with a group from another part of the world, how do you manage those different, we say personalities and cultures?
Yeah, well, like I was saying when I was coaching gymnastics, you need to read a room when you go in, and when I go in, I have to understand um, how the Ethiopians work, how the Chinese work, how the Russians work, and it's not to just stereotype, but I've got to know what makes them tick. Um, the Ethiopians are quite giggly and funny, and they like music, and they like to live in that kind of bubble. The Russians are a little bit more strict and a little bit more precise and a little bit more stoic. Um, but even when you're talking about Canadians and British and New Zealand, we all speak the same language, but we're not the same. We've all been brought up differently. So it's about knowing your team, knowing your people, knowing what you're working with,
So the
and language as well. Yeah.
Well, you just dropped that in there. Okay, so I want to dig into that a little bit. Language. How do you manage that?
Well, to be honest, we're all in the same business, so there's a common body language that we all know. Like if you're twisting and you're throwing your head out or you're doing something, you can use body language to do that. We do speak English at work, which is helpful for me as a coach. And most of them can speak pidgin English or good English, and we kind of get by. There's so many times that things are misunderstood, but I have to make sure that that doesn't happen so that we don't take unnecessary risks.
Yeah. Teams and people being misunderstood. That's always the joys of leading groups.
Uh-huh.
I suspect that in your career as a coach, you've dealt with teams that work really well together, have high levels of cohesion, or as I would say, teams that swear by each other, not necessarily about each other. Can you share a time where you've probably had the opposite of that shining, and maybe the teams, the relationships aren't good, or they're just not on that same page? What strategy have you taken to that you could share with people listening to the podcast today in terms of those tough times? Because that's usually the questions I get. It's when things are going good, it was like, "Rah, rah, let's go." But when it's the flip
Yeah.
side, that's the difficult thing.
I firstly, I have taken over teams that have been quite dysfunctional and broken, a little bit separated and stuff. When I took over that team, I probably listened and observed for at least a month to 6 weeks. Um, doesn't mean that I agreed with them when they're talking to me, but I did listen, and I needed to know kind of where things were falling apart. Um, and I remember sitting down with the team and actually being quite brutally honest, after giving some subtle feedback, which wasn't really taken on board. I then had to be a little bit more blunt, I guess, and direct. I'm okay to call it out. I'm okay with doing that kind of stuff. Um, but it doesn't mean it was easy. So I did have to sit the team down, setting expectations, sitting where is the team currently, but also making them understand that where we needed to go. But like I said, most of that was after listening to them for quite some time first, and so I was I guess a little bit brutal in my I don't want to say speech, but like my discussion with them. Um, I knew that they enjoyed music, so I would put music on. So if I flip now to what did I do?
Yeah.
Um, I put music on in training, and let them sing and dance at the beginning. I would send a WhatsApp group every day to highlight the successes that we did the day before, and also the challenges that we'd had. Um, I would set out a plan of action for what is happening that day, and that was completely transparent. I believe in being transparent with them, so they knew exactly what the goals are. And I've I did that every day for about 6 months, and I had to be accountable, making sure that I messaged them every day. I made sure that I met with them every day. I set the goals every day, but I also sat with them at the beginning of training and asked them, do those goals align with what they think they're supposed to be doing as well? Um,
What does it all look like in an environment from a team performance perspective?
let's say as a coach, I have deadlines of like we need to have something ready by a given date, and I work backwards. And when I work backwards, that goes back to the current day, and then I'll do incremental or micro goals for each day and for the week. And but I will also make sure that is something that they agreed upon as well. It doesn't mean I necessarily would bow down to them if they disagreed, maybe, but we had to be aligned in what that goal had to be achieved for the day. So that might be um, certain tricks and skills that needed to be achieved, and certain components of that trick or skill that needs to be achieved. But uh, it was also trying to build a team morale at the same time. So I was doing a twofold thing. It wasn't just
Mm.
about tricks. I I set up strength and conditioning groups with groups that actually didn't really like each other. So, and I forced them to talk, forced them together to actually make them talk, and I put them in smaller groups. And then from that smaller group, I put that into a bigger group, and then I put that into a bigger group. And it was about just them communicating. They didn't have to like each other, but they had to respect each other and actually communicate.
Yeah.
So I was trying to build it not necessarily just on skills, but also on their collaboration and their communication. And for me, communication was probably the biggest thing that was broken, I guess.
So if I'm playing that back in terms of working with a team that's, say, fractured, or just not performing well as a group, what I heard you say that you did is you focused on relationships and strengthening the relationships amongst the
Yep.
group. So getting people to work together that may not have liked it, but starting in smaller groups and then getting that to a bigger group. So focusing on that allowing them to connect. I also heard using the environment and manipulating the environment, i.e., playing the music at the beginning and letting them have fun with that. And the other thing I heard around that was getting on the same page with what you were trying to achieve and how. Like you started the end goal, here's our plan to go there. What are your thoughts? But then also, this is a challenge I see with leadership groups as well, is this balance between how much do we collaborate and take people's inputs in versus we need to make a decision at some stage and the leader's experience is just as relevant as everybody else, but you got to pull that lever. So again, yeah, all ingredients to creating teams that really shine and swear by each other. Um, but putting your lens on it, I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, but there has to be an outcome at the end. There has to be an achievable goal that at the end, and everyone has to understand where that goal is. And then, like I said, then I work backwards to try to achieve that on micro level.
You just triggered something that I did not play back in the recap of what you did, and listening. You said, for the first 4 or 6 weeks that you just went and listened to them. You may not have agreed, but you just listened to them. What made you realize that was the right approach?
Or how can I have opinion if I don't really understand where they're coming from and what's fractured and what's broken, or and what the actual problems are? If I felt like if I went in and be opinionated about something or have my own views, they were less likely to open up to me, and I wouldn't have created trust from them. So I needed to gain trust with them at the beginning, so that they felt comfortable to open up, that I wouldn't shout them down, that I didn't push their views aside. Everyone's entitled to their view, and yeah, that basically I wasn't going to shut them down.
Yeah. So again, what I'm hearing there is by listening and taking on their opinions, you're creating this environment of psychological safety where people feel safe to speak up, to share their opinions, maybe share a mistake. Again, another box to tick when creating those teams that perform really well. You just said the word trust.
Yes.
I'm going to throw a term at you, and I'd like to get what your first impressions and what it means to you. Trust that performs. When you hear that, what comes to mind?
Trust that does perform.
That performs. Yeah.
For me, that is that each of the people within that group trust and take accountability for what they do, for to achieve an outcome.
Okay. What about when you think about teams that swear by each other, not about each other?
So
What
by each other, not
Not about each other. Yeah. What does that look like to you if there's a team that's swearing by each other? What would again, let's go back to a Netflix doco, or maybe it's an Amazon one, just so we give everybody we're not sponsored by Netflix or anything, so we'll share the love. Um,
yeah,
if you saw a team that swore by each other, what would you see them doing?
swore by each other. Firstly, it's trusting each other, but trusting each other that they will actually do their job, and actually do what they say they're going to do. Um, no BS, being transparent, being accountable, being and having a good work ethic.
Okay. What else?
Um,
Another way to look at it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lee.
no, all heading towards a common goal. If you're not all going in the right, in, like I say, right direction, a direction that is expected, um, then it's going to be broken. So you won't have the trust of each other there.
Mm, love it. If what's it? So we're going to have a number of different leaders listening to the podcast. Um, what's a belief that you now hold that you've learnt over time that you wish more leaders understood?
Um, that I don't necessarily have to lead from the front. I can lead from behind, as long as I've got the trust of people there. So if if the team's doing well, then that's a reflection on the work that also I'm doing, and I don't have to be the one. I don't have to be the one out front. Um, so uh, the one thing that I also find important is if s- if someone comes up with a great idea or whatever, that is not my idea. They need the praise. They need to have the accolade of what that has brought to the team.
Mm. That's led me to one other question around tips. So you talked about like giving the accolades. That's usually a part of feedback that people forget about, like reinforcing the good.
Yes.
How does feedback work in with what you do? Because there's the positive feedback, so catching people doing things right. But what about how do you, what role does feedback play with the performers that you're working with when they're performing either during training or when they're performing in the actual shows?
A couple of ways. I try to make sure that feedback or that accolade or whatever is given um, immediately afterwards. There's not waiting for the next day and the day after or the day after or the end of a week when notes need to be given. Um, I believe that should be done instantly when that has been done. So they'll come off stage, they'll walk through. I'll give everyone a high five, and I'll say, "Dan, that was a bloody good performance, such and such." So that needs to happen. I will do a quick because we do everything on WhatsApp or Teams. I'll do a quick synopsis on that of just going. This was a great performance today. Um, Maybe highlighting one or two people or the group. It can be everyone. Um, but I'll also do a message at the end of each week. Uh, and go, this is where we were this week.
Mm.
Um, Look after yourselves at the weekend, have a good break, switch off, and we'll reset again on my Monday is a Wednesday, so we start on the Wednesday.
So you talked about the bits about reinforcing the good. What about the tough feedback when things don't go so well from your perspective? Any strategies or frameworks that you use that you could share?
Um, we've had some bad performances in general. I will collectively bring the group together. Um, Firstly, I will ask, what happened today, without judgment. They they can, like I said, I had to build the trust at the beginning. So
Mm.
when I was listening, I need to make sure that I keep that part going. So they'll tell me, my timing was off, or this was off, or whatever. I'll ask, is it a one time thing, or is it something that we've got an issue with? Um, and I'll depending on what that answer is, will depend on what the next steps need to be taken.
Yeah. And what about, because I've seen this in sport where sometimes in the heat of the moment, it's questionable whether or not that's the feedback, that's the right time. You talked about that giving feedback and you were talking about that positive feedback like instantaneously. Have you come across times where that might have backfired giving the constructive criticism in the moment? Or is it like that's just the way it works?
Um, Absolutely. I've had that backfire in my face. I've had to learn. It's not always doing it straight away. Most of the time, that's been the good feedback. But I've had them in my face, screaming, shouting, because they're annoyed, they're angry, and um, but I'll let that go. I'll let that go, and we'll reconvene. That might be half an hour later, an hour later, or the next morning. Or I'll ask them when is a good time to actually come and see you. The one thing I won't tolerate is they're having the bad language and that kind of stuff. If we're going to have a bad language one, we need to go in a room, and that's not for everybody else to listen to.
Yeah. Well, there's some research around the swearing and the bad language. It can make you stronger, increase your pain threshold. But on the flip side, yeah, when it's used in the wrong way, it actually makes things worse. So, yeah.
but there's an appropriate time to do it, and if we're going to have a strong discussion, then we need to do that privately.
Yeah. Lee, I want to thank you for this chat. There's a couple of things that that stood out to me, and I think you used the word grinding early on. Like when you're a kid, you really had to grind it out growing up in your neighborhood. Whether it's grinding or perseverance, to me, that's been a thread all along your career. Like to get to the point and achieve the success you did as an athlete. There's a lot of grinding it out day after day, night after night. Um, and then that transition period, that wouldn't have been easy. There's a lot of stories where we hear about people who don't grind out. It just becomes too much. And you persevered through that. Um, and then obviously now, but it's kind of grinding it out in a different way, in a way that I think is a second thread that you do things your way. So that's come through in terms of even the story about going, I'm taking a mental break. I'm going to work at a petrol station just to do something. Somebody who's had a career like you, who's taking care of Michael Jackson's mom, high profile, and working with, a brand like Cirque du Soleil, for someone to do that, really, I think it takes a lot. But again, it's how you do things, and you backed yourself and able to get to a point where you're at right now. So, and the third thing that stands out to me is, and you picked up on, you mentioned this before, outcome driven. Like there is a goal that we are working towards, and there always needs to be that, and then we can work backwards. But I heard that come up a couple times through the conversation, whether that's with your sport, with you as a coach, or even in life. So if there are three words that stood out to me that I had to describe you, those are them. So I want to thank you for coming on Teams That Swear, sharing your story, and also giving that advice and insights that I know many leaders will be able to use to help their team shine as well.
Awesome.
Hey there, it's Adrian. This time a few days later after speaking with Lee. Listening back, what struck me most is how quietly and powerful Lee's leadership really is. He's not a loud guy. I wouldn't consider him to be real slick. I don't mean that in a bad way, but he's grounded because he's lived through real rebuilds. Now, here's what stood out to me. You don't need to have it all figured out to lead well. We learned that Lee leads Cirque performers. These are world-class athletes while still working on himself. That's not weakness. That's what real leadership is all about. The other thing that stood out to me is that sometimes the team isn't necessarily broken, but sometimes they just stop talking. It was interesting the way Lee used movement, music, and emotion to bring people back together. I wouldn't consider that tactical. I just thought it was pretty human. The last thing that stood out to me is that performance and presence are not the same thing. Lee used to perform for medals. Now he shows up to connect and create connection. That shift changes everything, especially in fractured teams. Now, before I share 3 practical things that you can try with your team, I'd like to ask for a small favor. If this episode made you stop and think, or gave you something you want to pass on, hit follow on the podcast or share it with somebody else who needs to hear it. I'm hoping that this will help more teams swear by each other and not about each other. Now, let's get back to the 3 things that you can try with your team based on what Lee shared. Here's the first one. Ask your team this. What's something this group used to do well that for one reason or another we've stopped doing? See what kind of answers that you get. You might get this initial reaction of, I'm not sure. Give them some time to think about. You might be surprised with what comes out. The second thing can be about trying a different way of resetting the energy. And I'm not talking about just a new process. It could be creating a shared playlist. It could be some kind of movement, and not necessarily circus moves, although in a meeting room that would look kind of funny. Maybe it's about having a walking meeting. It's amazing what you do when you get outside. Or somehow bringing in some laughter. Could be a funny meme, a reel, or a story. Remember, we all remember how teams feel, not just what they do. And the third thing that you can do, normalize not knowing. You don't need to perform certainty. So to try and do that, here's something you could say. Hey, I'm still working this out, but here's what I do know. This will build more trust than fake confidence ever could. Give one of those a go. Maybe treat it like an experiment and see what shifts. And if you ever want to talk about how I can help you and your leadership team work with clearer language, deeper trust, and team dynamics that actually stick, reach out. All my details are in the show notes. Cheers.